We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.
Good morning and welcome to the Monday edition of my radio empire. The Monday Mashup. What's happening, everybody? It's Monday. It's the 30th, and we have, I guess, this is the last day. This is the last day of April. I lose track of Gregorian time. It is the last day of April, and we are moving squarely into the sign of Taurus with the arrival of May Day, which is tomorrow. You know, May Day is a pretty interesting day in that it represents the celebration of the phallus in most cultures. It is, if you look back through history, you'll see that one of the more famous things to do on May Day was the maypole dance. Yes, the maypole dance, where people danced around a pole. It's also known as the Morris dance, as well as the maypole dance. And it is literally the rise of the sap into the male member. And in the 20th century, it was personified by, I mean, I'm dating myself here, but when I was a kid, whenever it was May Day, we'd always see 30 seconds from Russia. 30 seconds from Russia. And it was the Russians parading out their latest missiles. And that was their May Day, right? It was like, let's bring out our weapons. Let's bring out our biggest, most phallic missiles we have to show people how strong and powerful we are. I think the Chinese did it too, although I think they have smaller missiles. So May Day, May Day is tomorrow, and May Day is probably what people should be saying to themselves with the passing of CISPA. Not a good thing. I talked about it a bit on Friday's show before I get out of here. It is not a good thing, and I'm going to tell you why it's not a good thing. One of the biggest pieces with CISPA is that, number one, if anything happens, let's say for instance, Facebook decided to pass on a bunch of information about you. If anything were to happen and you were to get engaged and involved and try to figure out what kind of information was passed around about you, CISPA is not accountable or held accountable to the FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act. So if you're a journalist even or a researcher and you want to use the FOIA, CISPA has figured out a way, or they've figured out a way through CISPA to make themselves immune from any kind of request of official documents. So that's a pretty big piece. It's a really big piece regarding CISPA. The other thing is that it supposedly, even with some of the amendments that took place, supposedly the internet providers, or not even internet providers, people like Facebook or people like Google, entities, online entities that acquire your personal information, we're trusting these entities to not do anything with that information. Now, do you trust them? No, not at all. Not in the least. So I found a little clip here from RT today, and there's a couple of people that are talking about CISPA with the fetching hostess on RT today. It's about a 2-minute and 30 clip. Let's listen to this. 2-minute 42. They say it's from Moscow. I always wonder if RT today is from Moscow. Maybe it's from New York. I don't know. But let's find out what these guys have to say about CISPA. One of them is well. Here we go. Here we go.
Is CISPA the next SOPA? You may have seen this headline making its way across the internet in the last week or so. So tonight, we want to clear a few things up. Now, no, the Cyber Intelligence Sharing and Protection Act, better known as CISPA, is not the next SOPA. But the truth is that it's even scarier. Now, we spoke about it just last week, and it's just one of several competing cybersecurity bills making their way through Congress. But CISPA specifically is a House version, and it's the worst of them all. Under the veil of doing things for cybersecurity purposes, a very broad and vague definition, it would allow companies to collect and monitor private communications and then share those with the government and anybody else. But you can compare it to SOPA in the sense that it's already starting to anger a large portion of the internet community. You see, in the past, we've told you about how private companies like ISPs, Facebook, other telecoms have been gathering information about you to share with third parties. And, of course, thanks to the Patriot Act, the government has the ability to do all kinds of monitoring, including the authority to intercept wire, oral, and electronic communications, as long as it's for the sake of fighting terrorism. But CISPA would add a brand new Orwellian dimension where the government's intelligence firms can work with private companies to collect your personal information, and the law doesn't even specify where that information would go, as in which particular government agency. So that means that it could end up in the hands of the NSA or another military agency for all we know. And let's face it, they're probably the ones who would want this information the most. Now, did I mention, if you're being watched, you probably wouldn't even know about it. Now, you probably already have lots of questions, right? So what will get you monitored? What type of private information can be monitored? What can the government do with it once it actually has that information? Well, frankly, we have a lot of questions because, as of now, the language in this bill is so incredibly vague. According to the bill, theft or misappropriation of private or government information, intellectual property, or personally identifiable information, all that can get your information collected. So that opens up a lot of doors. And as Trevor Chim brought up last week, it lets the U.S. conveniently overlook privacy laws because, hey, after all, they say that they're on the lookout to keep you safe.
So what it does is essentially carves out a cybersecurity exception to all of our privacy laws. And then once it gets to the government, all of this information, your communications, your private communications, we don't know exactly where it goes or what they're using it for. We don't know which agency it goes to or whether they're allowed to share between agencies, whether they're allowed to use this information for other than cybersecurity purposes like normal criminal investigations. And we know in the Rogers bill that the NSA is probably going to be one of the biggest benefactors.
Good to know, right? The government could monitor, share, even hold on to any and all communications that were discovered by private companies. And we don't even know where it'll go. Now, it's this broad language that has so many people so worried. Anonymous is just one of the many critics out there of H.R. 3523, pointing out that it allows the government to interpret the law in such a number of degrees that any online communication could be suspect and thus unknowingly monitored. But I guess that we can't be too shocked by this legislation. After all, cybercrime has been declared enemy number one here in D.C. And surprise, surprise, lawmakers that are heading up these cyber war committees are also the ones co-sponsoring this bill. Both Dutch Ruppersberger and Mike Rogers are ranking members of the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. And Rogers explained that he's backing this bill because every day U.S. businesses are targeted by nation-state actors like China for cyber exploitation and theft. The broad base of support for this bill shows that Congress recognizes the urgent need to help our private sector better defend itself from these insidious attacks. How convenient, right? You throw in a little line about China being the bad guys and the fear-mongering the crap out of politicians until they sign onto this bill. But sadly, that's kind of what's happening thus far. This bill already has 100 sponsors. After all, you don't want to be caught speaking out against national security. And those aren't the only politicians in favor of CISPA. There are a large number of corporations that are voicing their support. See, Facebook, Microsoft, Verizon, and IBM, they're all amongst the corporations who think that CISPA is a good idea. According to Andrew Coots over at Digital Trends, the reason that they're in favor of this bill over SOPA or PIPA, well, it all comes down to business. See, if you remember, SOPA would essentially force companies to police the web, hunt down pirates, putting the onus on them. So, of course, they said no. But CISPA is different. It'll actually make life easier for those companies because they're not responsible for finding anything. They would be protected against any personal lawsuits from privacy advocates because, well, this would be the law. Plus, they'd be part of the bigger plan to stop any cybersecurity threats. So politically, this is a win-win for them. Let's get back to the original question here. Is CISPA the new SOPA? Well, not really. A number of tech companies are actually backing this bill, unlike SOPA. And although some are concerned that CISPA could even be interpreted to go after copyright infringement, it doesn't stop there. This thing is about security and not just piracy. And when it comes to those congressional signatures, SOPA had about 80 supporters until the internet blackout on January 19th forced them to change their mind. But both bills have raised the ire of the internet community for their alarmingly broad language when it comes to monitoring the internet. Sadly, though, we haven't seen the same outcry over this bill that we saw when it came to SOPA. Thankfully, though, advocacy groups out there and Anonymous do continue their campaign against H.R. 3523.
Given the speed that the latest censorship bill could sneak through Congress, however, anyone concerned over the future of the internet should be on the lookout for CISPA as it continues to be considered on Capitol Hill.
And in fact, Anon has already hacked into 2 companies that have openly backed CISPA. But the real question here is, can anything be done to stop this legislation? Can the internet community perform another SOPA miracle without the help of the major tech companies to kill this bill before it becomes law? Well, I guess we're just going to have to wait and see.
So that's it. That's from RT Today, talking about the draconian CISPA. And, you know, this is all made possible because of the Patriot Act. And this is all made possible because of what happened during 9/11. And we just keep going further and further down it's not the rabbit hole. We just keep going further and further down the food chain here on rights. And it's all a sham. It's all a fucking sham. That's what it is. If you read some of the mainstream media, mainstream press, they're quoting that the core members or the core cells of Al Qaeda are all gone. Now think about that for a second. The core cells of Al Qaeda, if there was even really an Al Qaeda, they're all gone, or they're severely disabled. So if they're severely disabled, then why is there a more aggressive and unrelenting approach to locking down, quote unquote, cybersecurity? Well, maybe, just maybe, it's because it wasn't meant for Al Qaeda in the first place. That everything that we're experiencing right now, as he pours his coffee, is meant for us and was meant for us all along. Of course it was. Of course it was. Now, why don't people do something? Why don't people get angry? Why don't they get out and protest? You know, why don't they go beyond the Occupy movement? And why haven't they been doing this for a long time? Well, one of the reasons why people might not be able to muster up any kind of relevant, and I mean relevant, either counterattack or opposition towards things like these. Number one, we're taxed. Literally and figuratively, we're taxed. You know, people work 3, 4 jobs in order to just keep things rolling. That's number one. And if we're not taxed on the economic front and the time front, we're taxed on the physical front. And the physical front might be the battleground. It might be ground zero for what ails people in terms of being able to generate any kind of momentum and clear sovereignty in their lives. And what substance or what is it in our environment that potentially could keep us from being able to mount a sturdy defense, to have a will of any sort or of any kind? And the will is an important thing. It's an incredibly important thing. I've talked about the will as it relates to your ability to generate momentum in your life, or the will as an agency that allows you to make choices both proactively and retroactively in order to say yes to things that are important or no to things that are not so important. The will is essential. So what is it in our culture that continually undermines our will? Well, it might not be that far from where you are. In fact, it might be as close to your tap water. And I'm talking about fluoride. And fluoride has been happening in this country for the last 60 years. So for the next few minutes, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to talk about fluoride, and I'm going to read something. This is a reprint from Nexus magazine. This is from 1995, okay? 1995. So we're going back into the Wayback Machine here. And we're going back, what is that, 17 years. So let's talk about this here. Let's get into Fluoridation, Mind Control of the Masses by Ian Stevens. And I'm going to be reading for a little bit, and I may take a break. There's part 1, and then there's part 2. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read through part 1 here, and then I'm going to take a break and play some music and jump into the chat room. And then I'll get into part 2. And I'll start with the foundations of fluoride. So let's see, here we go. The story has a beginning, it has a middle, but it has no ending. The ending will undoubtedly be written in countless hospital records, on tiny gravestones, in the bones of the crippled, and in the hearts of the bereaved. Even so, the true cause of the ending will never be advertised. One record that slipped past the establishment net is duplicated herein, believe it or not. The existence of this death certificate has been denied in writing and to overseas scientific inquiry by Australian administrators. What follows is but a fractional part of the middle of a story that began before the turn of the century and was provoked by a statement contained in an address in a reply to the governor's speech to Parliament as recorded in Victorian Hansard, 12 August 1987, by Mr. Harley Rivers Dickinson, a Liberal Party member of the Victorian Parliament for South Barwon, hence the title. The relevant Hansard abstract is reproduced herewith. It is emphasized that the writer imputes Mr. Dickinson with no other responsibility for the contents of this thesis than being the parliamentary trigger which motivated it and research data which it contains. At the end of the Second World War, the United States government sent Charles Eliot Perkins, a research worker in chemistry, biochemistry, physiology, and pathology, take charge of the vast Farben chemical plants in Germany. While there, he was told by German scientists of a scheme which had been worked out by them during the war and adopted by the German General Staff. This was to control the population in any given area through mass medication of drinking water. In this scheme, sodium fluoride occupied a prominent place. Repeated doses of infinitesimal amounts of fluoride will in time reduce an individual's power to resist domination by slowly poisoning and narcoticizing a certain area of the brain, and will thus make him submissive to the will of those who wish to govern him. Both the Germans and the Russians added sodium fluoride to the drinking water of prisoners of war to make them stupid and docile. In a book written by Dr. Hans Muhlenbaugh of Haarlem, Holland, called Fluoride, The Freedom Fight, the author describes the ultimately successful endeavors to free the Dutch people from water fluoridation. Those endeavors included the only properly conducted double-blind study ever done anywhere in the world into the effects of tap water. One brief passage is headed Perkins, and a reproduction of that section gives sufficient confirmation by a remote and independent source of the Dickinson statement, as printed in Hansard, to reinforce the need for additional investigation into this one behavior control aspect of the fluoride debate and relate it to 1987. The entire Perkins paragraph is reproduced below. Elsewhere in this book, Dr. Muhlenberg also relates how that first Perkins anecdote was confirmed in differing ways and from reliable independent sources. Perkins. When 1971 was drawing to a close, I received a paper containing a strange story. This story was to haunt us repeatedly throughout the long, drawn-out battle. It was a story resembling science fiction, bizarre and unbelievable. There are those who warn me not to even mention this story, and I can appreciate why. On the other hand, the task of a historian is not to relate things as they should have happened, but as they actually did happen. The Perkins saga was different from other fluoride stories. The story of industries hoodwinking the public into buying a pollutant as a medicine is simply whodunit. Grotesque though it may sound, it is no more than the consumer fraud of this polluted century, as described in Fluoridation and Truth Decay by Gladys Caldwell. But the story I now read was different. It gave one the cold shivers. It told of a chemical engineer, Mr. Perkins, who related how immediately after the Second World War, he was one of the Americans put into the well-known I.G. Farben company in Germany. There, he discovered that I.G. Farben had developed plans during the World War to fluoridate the occupied countries, because it had been found that fluoridation caused slight damage to specific parts of the brain. This damage had a very particular effect. It made it more difficult for the person affected to defend his freedom. He became more docile towards authority. Scientists in the camps of both opponents and proponents of fluoride have always dismissed this story as mere poppycock, but it had a life of its own and reared its head time and again. It fed the suspicions of many people that there was more to fluoridation than meets the eye. As far as I know, there is no one who has done any serious research into whether the fluoridated person is really more docile, easier to rule, more impressed by authority than the non-fluoridated one. There is, though, one peculiar thing. Every Dutch doctor has a medical reference book for 1984. One of the chapters is entitled Tranquilizers, looking at the minor tranquilizers. I find 24 substances in their chemical formulae do not show any connection with fluoride. However, there is one heading. There is also one heading, major tranquilizers. Of those, there are 27, and 7 of them are of a fluoride compound. One of these is CMAP. It is one of the strongest antipsychotic substances we know. This means that 25% of the major tranquilizers are connected with fluoride. I do not draw any conclusions. The only thing one can say at this point is, with Alice, curiouser and curiouser. Here's the next title, or the next section, Induced Apathy. Actually, there is little that is novel in the concept of controlling minds and manners of the multitude by chemical/dietary means. That it was practiced by Hitler's regime is made more credible when we know that as far back as 1938, the U.S. government and allied to boot, the government of a democratic Christian country, was considering the transformation of American citizens and others into zombies by a number of proposed techniques. The U.S. Army searched for the perfect incapacitating agent, according to General Falens, to put it in the enemy's water supply. Included in the drug tests were the hallucinogenic LSD and the amnesiac BZ, 10 times more potent than LSD, and a schizophrenic agent called bulbocapine. The Rockefeller report to the United States President on CIA activities said the drug program was part of a much larger CIA program to study possible means of controlling human behavior. One drug which received special attention in the 50s and early 60s under the cryptonym of MK-Ultra was succinylmethionine chloride, listed under a number of product names including anectine, a halogenated anticholinergic agent with all the symptomatic side effects up to and including cardiac arrest ascribed to these agents in the medical literature. Please retain the term anticholinergic agent in mind, for owing to the health implications attendant in this particular anti-metabolic activity, it figures repeatedly in this thesis. Note, an advisor to the U.S. government on hypnotism or psychological behavior control, Dr. George Estabrooks, later became chairman, Department of Psychology, Colgate University. Internationally, Colgate was and remains the most ardent producer and advocate for the fluorination of domestic product fluoridated toothpaste. Of course, we have Colgate toothpaste here in this country. Now, should the reader's mind be already boggled to the point of disbelief, there are two facts which, if known about and or remembered, may instill sufficient confidence in that which is even more boggling and is yet to come. Bromine, or bromide, tea was administered to the enlisted men during the First and Second World Wars. The halogen bromine ingredients was said to quell the libido of the men and thus limit likely forays into dens of inequity and the acquisitions of venereal disease. The second fact is that all Australian military establishments provide their own halogenated fluoride water for troops resident therein, for the official reason that the element is good for developing teeth. Either we have a very immature military force, all under the age of 12 years, when the mythical effect of fluoride ceases to exist, or else there is another more obscure, less altruistic reason for this drug treatment of the troops. The cartel. The parliamentary Dickinson statement refers to the vast Fluoride chemical plants in Germany. It has been said by Anthony C. Sutton in his book Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler, without the capital supplied by Wall Street, there would have been no I.G. Farben in the first place, and almost certainly no Adolf Hitler in World War II. Intersen Gemeinschaft Farben, Intersen Gemeinschaft der Deutschen Tierfarben Industrie, or simply I.G. Farben, was a German chemical manufacturing concern that supplied the chlorine gas used by Germany during the First World War, but the eventual creation of the huge I.G. Farben cartel in 1924, when American bankers began to arrange foreign loans at what Professor Carroll Quigley terms the Dawes Plan. He has largely a J.P. Morgan production. In 1928, Henry Ford merged his German assets with I.G. Farben, to be followed by the American Standard Oil Company, which we know as the Rockefellers, who in concert with I.G. Farben developed the coal-to-oil hydrogenation process. In a letter to Roosevelt from Berlin in the early 30s, the U.S. ambassador in Germany, William Dodd, said, at the present moment, more than 100 American corporations have subsidiaries here or cooperative understandings. Now, let me take a break in this. The reason why the Americans were doing a lot of research and manufacturing in Germany at that time was because the Germans, even though they had a lot of their infrastructure wiped out in World War I, they still had a considerable amount of that infrastructure and a considerable amount of that manufacturing base still available to them. If you look at the rise of the Industrial Revolution in the West, it all starts in Europe first. Okay? The Industrial Revolution happens roughly in the 1800s in Europe. That's when it starts to happen. That's when the major manufacturing begins to take place in Europe, all across Europe, in Germany, in England, and it happens later in the United States because the United States was in the process of expansion. When I say expansion, we're talking physical expansion in terms of territory, in terms of empire. In Europe, there was no expansion. They were building. They were in a construction phase, not an expansion phase in Europe. So one of the reasons why these American companies like the Rockefellers and the Fords were doing business with the Germans at that time, a lot of it had very little to do with the rise of the Third Reich. A lot of it had to do with the fact that the Germans had the infrastructure and they had the technology, and these guys were putting their money where the infrastructure and the technology was. Now, the nefarious ends that evolved out of that are might be completely different, but there was a fundamental capitalistic momentum that was taking place during that time, pre-World War III. That's where the resources were in terms of manufacturing and industry, and that's where the intellectual resources were, for better or worse. That's where it was taking place. And then we see this morphing with the German economy and the German National Socialist identity into the Third Reich. So it isn't necessarily the presumption that that the Rockefellers or the Fords were Nazis, which is what I think the writer is trying to convince you of in this piece. So let me be clear on that, okay? So let's move on. In a letter to Roosevelt from Berlin in the early 30s, U.S. Ambassador in Germany, William Dodd, said, "At the present moment, more than 100 American corporations have subsidiaries here or cooperative understandings. The DuPonts have their allies in Germany that are aiding the armament business. Their chief ally is the I.G. Farben Company, a part of the government which gives 200,000 marks a year to one propaganda organization operating on American opinion. Standard Oil sent 500,000 U.S. a year helping Germans make a substitute gas for war purposes, but Standard Oil cannot take any of its earnings out of the country except in goods." So they were essentially getting the technology conversion from coal to oil or coal to gas, and then they were taking that out of Germany. So the processing and the refining was happening there. International Harvester Company president told me their business here rose 33%. That's a nice number. A year. Arms manufacturers. They could take nothing out. Even our airplanes people have secret arrangements with Krups. Again, these were major companies. They had major manufacturing facilities in place. They didn't have this stuff in the United States, really. It just was not really happening in the same way. So that they were literally, if you want to look at outsourcing, this is where the first inklings of outsourcing were taking place. General Motors Company and Ford do enormous business here through their subsidiaries and take no profits out. The I.G. Farben assets in America were controlled by a holding company, American I.G. Farben, which listed on its board of directors Edsel Ford, President of Ford Motor Company, Chase E. Mitchell, President of Rockefeller's National City Bank in New York, William Teagle, President of Standard Oil, New York, Paul Warburg, Chairman of the Federal Reserve, and brother of Max Warburg, financier of Germany's war effort, and Hermann Metz, a director of the Bank of Manhattan, controlled by the Warburgs. The Warburgs, of course, are a famous family. They go way back. They go as far back as the time of the Habsburgs, which we're talking 13th, 14th, 15th century. So the rise of old European money. And most of those houses, by the way, had been infiltrated by the Rothschilds and their network of accountants and bookkeepers who were the sons of Meyer Amschel Rothschild. So at some point, there was a merging of the houses of Rothschild with the house of the Habsburgs, the house of the Warburgs. There's the House of England, the Queen of England. Again, the merging of the house of the Rothschild. So this is all taking place in Europe. So when you read about the Warburgs, you read about the Habsburgs, especially in the latter part of the 18th, 19th, and 20th century, those families are, I wouldn't say they're more controlled, but there is a vested interest on a number of fronts being engineered by factions within these different houses in Europe. The House of Hanover, thank you. It's Monday morning, I'm still waking up. The English are the House of Hanover. So they're Germans. The English are Germans. Well, when I say the English are Germans, I'm talking about the Queen of England and their house. They are Germans. It is an interesting fact of history that 3 other members of the board of American I.G. Farben were tried and convicted as German war criminals for their crimes against humanity during World War II, while serving on the I.G. Farben board of directors. None of the Americans sat on the board as those convicted was ever tried as a war criminal. Throughout the entire Second World War conflict, not one bomb fell on I.G. Farben headquarters in Frankfurt, Germany, allegedly as a consequence of Allied orders. In 1938, I.G. Farben borrowed 500 tons of tetraethyl lead, the gasoline additive from Standard Oil. During 1939, the year Germany invaded Austria and Poland, the Standard Oil Company of New Jersey loaned I.G. Farben $20 million worth of high-grade gasoline. In 1939, American Aluminum Company, here's where we get into fluoride, Alcoa, then probably the world's largest producer of sodium fluoride, transferred its technology to Germany vis-a-vis the Alped Agreement. The Dow Chemical Company transmitted its experience and technology in that same period. Germany's 2 largest tank manufacturers were Opel, a subsidiary of General Motors, which was owned by J.P. Morgan, and the German subsidiary of the Ford Motor Company. Even with the purchase of oil from non-German sources, the major supplier of oil was still the Farben cartel. The I.G. Farben cartel, a monopoly on German gasoline production, just under half of the Germans' high-octane gasoline in 1945 was produced directly by I.G. Farben. So this goes on and on and on. So what the writer is doing here is trying to establish the role between the Allies and the Nazis, okay? So clearly there is a relationship between the Allies and the Nazis, but only in the sense that they were doing this from an industrial perspective, that they were trying to get as much out of this as possible. I don't believe that the Allies were trying to win World War II through the Nazis. I don't think that was the case at all. I think what they wanted to do is they wanted to use Germany as an R&D facility outside of the United States, outside of any kind of oversight, where they could work on this stuff with the amount of industry that had been developed at that time. So let's cut to the fluoride piece. In Australia, the Dental Health and Research Foundation, which has such names as Colgate Kellogg and the ex-I.G. Farben Associates, listed among its governors and contributors, has been irreverently but accurately dubbed the Fluoride Mafia, closely allied with the Sydney University Foundation into the halogen fluoride. Its benefits and its hazards have never been made available despite numerous attempts. An ABC Science Show's examination of the scientific integrity of Foundation 41 may explain the elusive, or is the word illusory, data. America is literally bursting at the seams with such foundations. The Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation, the Ford Foundation. It is necessary to mention these specifically because they were the first foundations to make grants and population control. And the Carnegie family merged with the Mellon Family Institute to create the Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh in 1967. The Mellon family were the founders of the original Mellon Institute, whence came the amazing but totally fallacious sodium fluoride dental caries prevention discovery, the discovery that literally turned garbage into gold. The Mellon family also founded the American Aluminum Company, Alcoa, the largest producer of the waste toxin sodium fluoride, which up to this point of Carey's discovery had relatively little known commercial or industrial value, was an environmental hazard of great public concern, and was very costly in terms of safe disposal. So it was the Carnegie Mellon family through Alcoa, which were one of the foundational families which produced fluoride. So we can look back to them. The author goes on to say, America has long been interested in behavior and mind control by chemical means. Americans who were at once financiers, industrialists, and population control advocates were intimately involved with Germany, where chemical extermination and chemical behavior control by inter alia sodium fluoride were placed into practice. America transferred this knowledge with material inter alia to Russia during its Lend-Lease cooperation. An American major producer of aluminum was the world's major source of sodium fluoride. American education and research funded by A, the major sodium fluoride producer, and B, a foundation involved in population control, was the origin of the dental caries prevention myth associated with sodium fluoride. A predominantly American company was the first to exploit this concept in dentifrice production, and American medical research figured largely in the fluorination processes that converted the negative embarrassment of mounting industrial waste to huge positive profit increases. Processes that other countries hasten to emulate. Processes which include the enormous outlet for fluorides in the fluoridation of water supplies. So what we're talking about here, really, and this is what I think that the author, is attempting to get to through an enormous and elaborate map which shows that there had been a significant confluence of philosophy, strategy, and intention on the part of a number of people to develop fluoride as a planetary carrier for mind control, as kind of a broad statement, but really as an agent that serves in the diminution of will. That is what fluoride is and does. Plain and simple. And it's everywhere. It is everywhere. So one of the things that he talks about is the effects of fluoride. So let's fast forward to those. He says, the following pages make slight transition from historically recorded fact and logic to indisputable fact, biochemical fact, and medical literature fact. The pharmaceutical nomenclature and the biochemical data involve fluorine, fluorides, with or without other ingredients, in virtually every phase of mind and behavior control, from mild sedation through controlled unconsciousness to death. Side effects of all drugs have in common the paradoxical characteristic of having an effect on some individuals exactly opposite of that which was the intentional effect, converting, for example, a tranquilizer into a potent stimulant, and thus the consumer from a pussycat into a slavery maniac. You can see this, by the way, with stimulants and people that have ADD. And theoretically, the hyperactive disorder, ADD, targeted youth were given or given now Adderall. That's the drug of choice, and it calms them down. It mellows them out. So a stimulant has the effect of mellowing these people out. For some people, the stimulant is a stimulant. That's how that works. So here we go. The side effects of exposure to these fluorides, ranging from the more common to the rarely reported, are as follows: cardiac toxicity, heart injury, respiratory depression or breathing difficulties, bradycardia, slower pulse rate, convulsions, central nervous system, psychomotor aberrations or brain dysfunction, transient sedation of heart or lung effects, ataxia, brain problems, irritation of the upper respiratory tract, rise and fall in blood pressure, apnoea, which would be impaired lung function and damage, tachycardia, increased pulse rate, bronchoconstriction, asthma, he raises his right hand, palpitations or irregular heartbeat, narcosis, brain drugging, and death. All of the above side effects are associated with either acute or chronic symptoms of anticholinergic toxicity. These are the findings. These are the findings of fluoride. So what we're dealing with in our culture right now is a bunch of numbed and dumbed down people. Why? Because we're drinking the water. We're not drinking the Kool-Aid. We are drinking the water. Now, as a parent, I have gone out of my way to provide non-fluoridated water for my kid. Now, I can't be responsible for what he drinks at school. I can't be responsible for what he drinks in the other part of the household, which is not located in my household. But with me, he's got the best shot of drinking non-fluoridated water. Recently, we go to a dentist who's actually a very cool guy. And the procedure, the first couple times I was there, was they would give him a fluoride treatment on the teeth. And I'm thinking, wow, I'm not sure I'm okay with this. I mean, I remember as a kid, they used to give us fluoride pills. Does anybody remember that? They gave us these little pink fluoride pills. I remember at school, I'll never forget this, when I was in junior high school, they would take us all into the auditorium where we'd all have a toothbrush and we'd all have this pink, gritty, sandy crap and a little Dixie cup with water and another like a styrofoam cup that was empty. And we would brush our teeth with this grit, which was probably enormously toxic and loaded with fluoride. This was all for our benefit. Are you kidding me? I even remember swallowing some of that stuff. I'm not sure what prompted me to do that. But when I took my kid to the child dentist, good guy, about the third time I went, I was like, you know what? No fluoride today. And I pushed back on it. And guess what? He was cool with it. He was really cool with it. And he said, oh, yeah, the kids get enough fluoride in the water anyway. They'll be fine. There we go. There we go. Oh, yeah, the kids get enough fluoride. I don't use fluoridated toothpaste, not in my house. I don't use fluoridated. He does brush his teeth with fluoridated water. Sorry, that's the way it goes. But it's just, it's in and out. I'm not sure what more we can do in terms of being able to control our water. I remember I just moved to Escondido. This was back in 2002. And 2003. It was 2003 I moved there. And I didn't know it, but Escondido did not have fluoridated water. I was like, yeah, great. And then like about 2 months after I got there, they started fluoridating their water. Great, thanks. I don't know if any of you have ever followed Svali, this woman who claims to be an Illuminati insider. Pretty compelling stuff. She was who was putting Svali? I'm not sure if it was. I don't think Rents was putting Svali. I think you had to find Svali on the net. I'm not sure how I ran across her, but it's very, very compelling, very dark material, raised within a quote-unquote Illuminati family, and some of the stuff she told was just horrific. Anyway, one of the places she went to for her, quote-unquote training was Escondido, which I thought was interesting. And then of course now the water becomes fluoridated there. So I wonder if they moved their operation out of Escondido, and that's why. Okay, we're done. Circus tent's moving. Fluoridate the water. We're out of here. Just an observation. Just an observation. How many of you know who Don Ruiz is? Don Miguel Ruiz, the guy who wrote the 4 Agreements. He wrote the 4 Agreements while he was living in Escondido. He was living in his mother's house in Escondido. And that's who wrote the 4 Agreements. So Escondido has an interesting role I liked living in Escondido, by the way. It was funky. I mean, it wasn't hip. It was not a hip place at all. But I liked it. I liked it. It was hot, but it had that high desert heat. It was. I dug it. I really dug it. There were great ion-ons in Escondido. Let's put it that way. The only thing I didn't like about Escondido was the close proximity to all the military. That was not cool. But that's San Diego in general. You're going to find that in San Diego in general. If you just get past these slavish love for the military, it's a great place. Wonderful place. The other thing I liked about Escondido was cheap. We had a 1,900 square foot house, and the mortgage on it was $1,500 a month. It was a nice house. Ah, yes, the good old days. The good old days. So fluoride, what can you do besides not drinking the water? You know, finding ways to get non-fluoridated water. And you can get filters that are non-fluoridated, that remove the fluoride. I did find a company. Let me see if I can find this company. I wonder if I don't think I bookmarked it. I found a really great company that had, you could set yourself up for about $149 with a really nice system. It's an above the sink system that will remove fluoride. So that's one thing you can do. But what can you do to remove the fluoride that's in your body? That's a whole other can of worms. And there's some really smart people in the chat room. Maybe they've got some insight into that. What fluoride does, by the way, is it attacks the pineal gland. It calcifies the pineal gland. And the pineal gland is atrophied anyway in most of us. But the pineal gland is our gateway to vision. It is the third eye, which opens us up to being able to see the world in a multidimensional perspective. It gives us insight. It gives us psychic abilities. It is the generator of our intuition. That's what the pineal gland does. And fluoride attacks the pineal gland. And it cripples the pineal gland. So what we're doing is we're cutting ourselves off from the antennae of the multiverse. That's what fluoride does. And then you throw in all the mercury amalgams that a lot of us have suffered through. It's and then you throw in the vaccines that have aluminum in the vaccines. There's a whole generation of us. We're just guinea pigs. Just guinea pigs. You know, I remember going with my parents to some place in New Jersey where they gave us a little sugar cube. Who the hell knows what was on that freaking sugar cube? I remember popping it in my mouth. Oh, it was some sort of vaccine. You know, and what did I grow up with? I grew up with severe allergies. Severe allergies. My allergies were so bad that there were days that I had to stay home from school. Severe headaches. And then it all morphed into asthma. This is what happened to a whole generation of us. And you throw in the fact that we started to drink sodas, which were just brimming with fructose and corn syrups. We had no clue about this stuff. None. And I was a soda freak when I was a kid. So there's a whole generation of us that were just laced with all this crap. And it has not gotten better. It has gotten worse. Because the fructose, at least the fructose that I was drinking, was from real corn. The fructose that people drink now, that's genetically modified fructose. It's a Frankenstein fructose. It's a wonder that we're all alive, to be honest with you. Or maybe that's really the point of it all, is to not kill so many people, to have as many sort of dumbed down, docile human batteries walking around emitting negativity or fear or anger or rage. Take anger out of it. To me, anger is not a sin. It is not an emotional sin. But fear, sloth, depression, anxiety, these are the killers. These are the real killers. They're biological killers, but they're also, when we produce these things, we also emit a charge when we have these emotions. They're not even really emotions. They're states. I wouldn't even call them emotions. Grief is an emotion. Anger is an emotion. Joy is an emotion. These are purified emotional experiences. Depression, anxiety, frustration, these are not emotions. These are states, and they are cultivated states. There's a difference between the two. It's 10:55. I've got 5 minutes left in the show. Looking ahead for Wednesday, we're back on the Wednesday schedule, navigating the astrological matrix. Friday, I've got guests lined up for Friday. I'm working on a guest for the Agenda 21 experience and breaking down Agenda 21, and I have a musical guest scheduled for Friday as well. So less of me this Friday, more of others on Friday. But Wednesday, navigating the astrological matrix. So what are we to learn from today's 55 minutes with Robert? Well, we can determine that there is a major push to add yet another layer of so-called security, which is really about more eavesdropping, information collection, and surveillance. That's what it is, plain and simple. And we learned that the reason why people don't object to this stuff is because maybe at a core level, we're all just rats in a cage. And we're all just dumbed down, fluoridated rats in a cage. And it's amazing, I think it's amazing in some ways, and a real testament to the human spirit that people do get up every day and do make some effort, and put forth some effort in order to break through the trance, the fluoridated trance that we've all been stumbling around in. And with that realization, I salute each and every one of you for having the courage, the fortitude, the commitment to re-enlist every single day in the ranks of being a human. And not just any human, a conscious human, an awakening human. So I salute you from the bottom of my heart. This is not an easy experience being on this planet. It's just not. Let's just be upfront about that. If I were to tell you that you are in hell, you would probably agree with me, because quite frankly, you probably are. But if you ever wanted to have the masterclass spiritual experience, it would be right here in this place, right now. And you signed up for it. You signed up for it. So you may as well get into it, get through it, and do the absolute best you can, realizing that this is the place that you chose to be in order to figure this out in the most intense and at times brutal conditions. I hate that voice. I should do my raps earlier. Anyway, I salute you. You're all heroes in my book. I'll be back on Wednesday, and we'll trip around the stars. Lots of action happening. Venus retrograde coming up. We'll discuss it. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to step on what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix. You got mashed.
We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words, I submit that these impressions are valid and significant. And I will even say this, such an impression is a clue that at some past time point, a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this, an alternative world branched off.